Welcome back to ESSA TV. The Hon Jeff Kennett AC served as the Premier of Victoria from 1992 to 1999 and a member of the Victorian Parliament for Burwood for 23 years. Mr Kennett was the founding chairman of Beyond Blue, a national organisation that promotes good mental health and seeks to dismantle the stigma surrounding depression and anxiety. He also currently serves as the president of the Hawthorn Football Club and a political commentator for the 7 Network. Mr Kennett, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
I'll start by asking, following yet another federal leadership spill in 2018 and Australia going through 5 Prime Ministers in 5 years for the second time this decade, how can faith be restored in Australia's political system so that the public can truly believe that their interests are being represented in Canberra?
I best think the simple answer to that is a group of politicians need to firstly develop a vision for where they want to take Australia over the next perhaps 32 years, which would take us to 2050, to regularly articulate that and be advocates for that vision, and importantly then to drive it, that is deliver it, and lastly I would say remain united. So while it has been uncomfortable and undesirable what has happened over the last decade, I live in hope that things will revert back to a more orderly society. But it's up to the politicians themselves to do it.
What would be the most effective way, do you believe, of them going about that?
Well, developing a vision, articulating where they and their policies want to take Australia by 2050. At the moment, no one has any idea where any of the politicians want to take us. They're all reacting to what's happening today and desperately trying to win an election. So the question is whether they're acting in our interests or whether they're acting in theirs.
The recent controversy over the illumination of the Sydney Opera House sales in the promotion of the Everest horse race has seen a divide emerge in public discourse, albeit not among party lines. Whilst both major parties at a state and federal level backed the illumination, many in the community have reacted with dismay at plans that the heritage-listed structure be used for this form of advertising, citing it as further proof that politicians are out of touch with their constituents. I'd love to get your take on it. Was this just a big overreaction from the public side, or are there lessons that politicians need to take from the controversy?
I wouldn't have done it or allowed it. I think the Opera House is iconic. It is arts orientated, and although I say to have a modern cosmopolitan city, you've got to have a strong cultural heart. Part of that culture is made up by the arts and part of it is made up by sport. But I would not have allowed the Everest or any other horse race to be able to use the iconic Sydney Opera House sales as a marketing tool.
Do you think that a lot of the anger directed by the public was fueled by other decisions of the government too, and of powerful people such as Alan Jones, who have often conflicted with many members of the public, or do you think that fueled it a bit? Or
it didn't matter who fueled it. I think the simple question is, you asked me what would I have done had I been Premier. I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have allowed it.
The Australian Broadcasting Corporation is Australia's most trusted news organisation, with only 9% of the population distrusting the national broadcaster's news output as of June of this year. However, a tumultuous week recently saw the sacking of ABC Managing Director Michelle Guthrie and the resignation of ABC Chairman Justin Milne. How should the ABC recover from this week to ensure that it prospers as an unbiased source of news and information, free from government intervention?
Well, it has not been a good few weeks for the reputation of the ABC, and there is no doubt that those who argue bias have a case to put. If we require an ABC, its news broadcast should be factual and its investigatory work should at least be balanced. In other words, having assessed and taken on board the information and evidence from both sides before coming to a conclusion. And the fact that it has handled things even-handedly must be obvious to the eyes of the viewer or the listener. So I think the ABC has sadly performed below substandard. I certainly think the board has interfered in the management of the ABC, which I think is wrong. It can set policy with the ABC, it can set strategy with the ABC executives, but the fundamental responsibility of the board is both to adhere to good governance, to select a CEO, to work with the CEO in arriving at a strategy and back the CEO in delivering that. Now, it's fine for a person to express views about aspects of the operation of the ABC, but at the end of the day, those are just views, and it's up to the CEO to exercise his or her discretion. I think, in real terms, it would have been a wonderful opportunity for the government to sack the board and start again. So that would have me supporting a continuing role for the ABC, but in a much more professional manner.
On to Victorian state politics. State Opposition Leader Matthew Guy has stated that he will appoint you as the head of Commercial Passenger Vehicles Victoria, formerly the Taxi Services Commission, if he prevails in the upcoming state election. If Matthew Guy is elected, what changes would you make to improve the taxi industry and increase its competitiveness in light of new ride-sharing apps such as Uber, which are now well established in the market and here to stay?
It would not be my intention to increase competitiveness. I leave that to those who participate in the market. We have a taxi industry, we have a ride-sharing industry, and one puts pressure on the other through new technology, etc. That's the marketplace at work. What I would do is be prepared to review the way in which the government has done away with licences to make sure that those who were dealt with badly and inappropriately are dealt with more fairly. Secondly, I would continue to promote the idea that ride sharing and the taxi services we know it provide the most flexible form of public transport in Victoria. And it should be recognised as such, and it should be supported. That does not mean it's got to be supported financially, but you do have to give them the opportunity to exist and compete fairly.
On that note, how do you believe that taxi services and ride-sharing apps as well have been underrepresented currently?
Well, ever since we were in office last century, when we gave people movers, flexible transport, taxis, hire car, recognition as an important part of the public transport system, no government since then has given it the priority that we did. And we did that because it's not only important for some of our infirm, for our senior citizens, also for our youth. It is a very vital part of moving around our state. So I always recognise that if you had a ride-sharing / taxi industry where people were confident, where they could continue to work within the framework of the day in a sustainable manner, they're more likely to be wonderful promoters of the state in which they work. So there's a big army of drivers and owners out there who are at the moment very disillusioned, lost, some are hurting, many in financial difficulty. That should never have arisen.
Recently, you took aim at federal opposition leader Bill Shorten's plan to offer $25 million towards a Tasmanian AFL team. Why do you believe that a standalone Tasmanian team would not be economically viable, and that it is better both economically and from an AFL standpoint for the state to focus on the development of grassroots football and to get its AFL action from the games that North Melbourne and your beloved Hawthorn play in the state?
Well, Bill's commitment, if he wins the next election of that 25, will not be there to support an AFL team. It's fundamentally there to support AFL activity in the state. So a lot of that will go to the promotion of junior football and local competition, that is the Tasmanian League. But as you know, I'm president of the Hawthorn Football Club, and I know what it costs to put a team on the field. And there's no point putting a team on the field for 1 or 2 years. You want it there forever. So as a minimum, you're going to need about $50 million. Now, unless they can secure that, that team will not survive. And already we're seeing some teams in the AFL having trouble with finances, probably about 5 or 6. So it's at least a third, maybe more, of the clubs in the competition. So the last thing I want to do is be part of an organisation that gives in to the emotional interests only to have the product that they're emotional about fall over or not be competitive.
The issue of AFL teams being supported by poker machines has recently emerged. You have warned that, despite sympathising with the social argument, clubs will become dependent on the sport's governing body if an appropriate replacement source of income is not identified. What potential source of income could replace poker machines in the years to come? And more generally, what sources of income can sporting clubs look to? Because there are clubs such as those in the A-League which aren't supported by poker machines, but still often struggle to turn a profit.
Yes, well, that's a very good comparison. There are a number of clubs now in the AFL that don't have or are getting out of poker machines, and that's their choice. Poker machines are legal, and poker machines are very heavily regulated, and we're happy to be part of that industry. Those who oppose poker machines are trying to pick off the AFL clubs one by one, but they're not picking off other clubs or pubs in the community that have the machines. And in fact, some of the clubs have got out of poker machines by selling their entitlements to other sporting bodies, and no one's complained about that. So you haven't reduced the number of poker machines in the community, all you've done is shuffle them around. And my argument is, if you want to change the law to make them illegal, change the law. But no government is going to do that. And you've seen what happened in Tasmania when they tried to do it. The political party that had that policy was roundly defeated because of the number of people that are employed in the industry as well as those who play it. So what sort of industry could replace it? I guess you've got to build up other outside activities. It might be that you get associated with a medical centre from which you earn income. It might be that you turn on or develop some other sort of games that people pay to participate. It might be paintball. You might have, paintball games. I don't know. But at Hawthorn, we derive revenue from the poker machines, our two facilities. And if we did not have that income, we would not be recording surpluses. We'd be in deficit every year. So we haven't found the quick solution to getting rid of them.
You're well known as the inaugural chairman of mental health non-profit Beyond Blue. What is the key to spreading awareness about the work of Beyond Blue and mental health in general amongst the community, especially amongst young people who are struggling with the pressures of working and academic studies at the same time?
Yes, it's not easy, and particularly in a world that is becoming more and more cluttered by noise, by retailers promoting their products, by all the other advertising, by social media. So I think the key to promotion is really about having as your leaders some people there that can cut through that clutter. I think I did that when I was chairing Beyond Blue. My successor, Julia Gillard, has standing in the community. So when she speaks, she gets listened to or published. When she tries to open a door with a business person or a government, she can do that. So I think it's really about making sure you have among your ranks of leaders people who can be good advocates, but importantly the test should be, can they cut through the clutter?
On the topic of youth political engagement, I've had friends admit to me in the past that they do little to no research before arriving at the polling booth and make their decisions solely based on the how to vote pamphlets or even the logos that appear on the ballot forms themselves. So how should we change that and get more young people engaged in politics and interested with the issues that affect them, especially with the state and federal election to be held in the next year?
I think the answer to that is partly through what I said before when we were talking about the revolving doors of Prime Ministers. A political party needs to have a vision, which you don't have to totally agree with, but you can understand the rationale for. And it's got to take into account the aspirations of the country and all of its people over a reasonable period of time. And I'm quite sure if someone came up with that vision, young people would be very happy to embrace it. But at the moment, they, like more senior citizens, are living and making decisions almost in a vacuum. So the real test is to get young people interested, is to excite them. My football club, Hawthorn, has more members than the Labor and Liberal Party put together. So that says something about the state of politics in the country.
Thank you very much for your time today, Mr. Kennett.
All right, thank you, great pleasure.